Please welcome Theo Wilson.
Thank you. For many women, embracing ambition means challenging the paradigm as it is. And the rise of feminine power forces men to confront their unearned right to rule the world. This right to the levers of power, just because of our genders, is not even questioned in many circles. And when it is, many of our fragile egos get rubbed the wrong way because women are asserting the fact that they are, human. That's right, human. If only men knew that this kind of power endangers us too, yo. These egotistical power games that we play with each other not only make women suffer, but end our lives prematurely. It is estimated that 9 out of 10 people who have ever committed murder are men. The vast majority of those who have been murdered, also men. Therefore, anything that topples this paradigm is literally saving our lives. So in other words, ladies, keep going. So much more depends on you embracing your ambition than you know. Because there's this strange ripple effect that many of you may not be aware of. The conversation on femme sovereignty is leaking into intersections previously untouched by this conversation. In my neck of the woods, I run a grassroots salon called Shop Talk Live. We use barbershops to hold space for organized community discussions that affect our lives. Well, when several high-profile brothers in our community, including the mayor, got in some hot water about some sexual misconduct, we devoted 3 community forums to unpacking what misogyny looks like in the black community. Ladies, when Me Too hit the hood, it got real. Yo, talk about a challenging conversation. If you have ever tried to pull teeth from a live Siberian tiger, you may have an inkling of how hard it is to get black men to acknowledge black male privilege. It's hard enough to get white men to acknowledge male privilege. Even with them accounting for 44 out of 45 of our presidents, even with their faces on all the currency, even with them making up the majority of the CEOs and military high command, with their faces on Mount Rushmore, on land they're not indigenous to, right? And being the hero in dang near every movie, they still have a hard time facing that this society may indeed privilege them. I guess it's just a 400-year coincidence that they keep on landing on top, right? Alrighty, right? So, seriously. So, imagine how hard it is to sell this idea of privilege to black men. The historically oppressed do not react well when they are confronted with their role as oppressors. They aggressively ask, brothers get to clapping their hands. Like, where's my privilege, bruh? Right? They ask me, right? So I got the privilege of being 6 times more likely to be killed by the police, right? They said I have the privilege of having a 1 in 3 chance of being incarcerated, the privilege of being guilty until proven innocent, the privilege of being followed around in stores, kicked out of Starbucks, killed without consequence, right? The privilege of having employers favoring black women over us, right? I had the exact same questions when I was confronted with the idea of privilege. And then, a black feminist that I know asked me, she said, Theo, when was the last time you were ever actually afraid of being sexually assaulted? I was stopped in my tracks. I told her that I spend most of my life walking these streets trying to convince people that I'm not about to do that to them. She said, answer the question, brother. I said, all right, well, the only time that I've ever actually feared that I would be sexually assaulted was the time that I was in jail. She said, well, every woman that you know is in jail. And even when you learn black history, who do you think of? Mostly men, right? Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, Huey P. Newton, right? So where's the Fannie Lou Hamer narrative? Where's Ida B. Wells? Where's the Phyllis Wheatley holiday? Things like that, right? Our very first forum gathered brothers in a place called Quality Care Hair. And the atmosphere was tense, to say the least. In fact, so thick was the anticipation of the unearthing of trauma Now, we literally had 3 therapists on hand to help us unpack, and we needed them. The first discussion centered around the sexual and physical safety of the women in our community. Us brothers, man, we talked about the music that we grew up under and who our icons were. Guys like Snoop, Pop, Notorious B.I.G., Eminem, and the infamous Dr. Dre, right? Now, no shade to these brothers. They are all giants in their own right. But wouldn't you know that West Coast gangster rap was not influenced by bell hooks? And consequently, neither were we. Our brand of machismo came at the expense of female bodies, and for many of us, them chickens was coming home to roost, right? The second talk centered around the blind spots that we black men have. See, many of us had never actually examined that in a racist, patriarchal, hierarchical system, as my father said, crap rolls downhill. Historically speaking, black men return home after taking it on the nose from white society, and many of us took it out on everybody smaller than us, starting with our women. Then, because of the light that was shed on the very real war against our bodies, black women's narrative just got swept underneath the rug, right? And now we have to make space for their narrative and the wounds that they've accrued from racism and our sexism. The third talk centered around us coming together. Sisters showed out in big numbers for that one, right? We talked about our common history, and we talked about the road that lie ahead. We talked about that there's no way out of each other, and that we are bound together by the forces of life itself. And then, as happens, hood brother raises his hand. He's like, yeah. I'm like, all right. He said, my man, if toxic masculinity means hyper-aggressive, domineering behavior, is toxic femininity when women reward that behavior with their bodies and affections. He talked about how many times that he had been passed up when women wanted the thug or the bad boy, right? He talked about how heartbreak made him more like the guys he got dismissed for. He said that his mother constantly emasculated him for the crime of simply resembling his father, and how this unconsciously drove his bad behavior with women. He said, doesn't this also have to stop if we want healthy masculinity in our communities? Why aren't women taking any of the blame for this? I was like, oh. So, your man had to get quiet for a second, listen to what my soul was telling me. And that these words came to mind. I said, brother, hurt people hurt people. This is all part of a cycle. And I said, be careful where in that cycle you want to begin that blame game, because it will only leave us spinning our wheels. Perhaps the courage to rise above this toxic cycle is a truer test of your manhood than anything you will ever receive from another man. This seemed to land, and a series of new relationships were formed from these conversations with an understanding that women asserting themselves is a phenomenon here to stay. Because truthfully, when I see women embracing their ambition, at the core of it, I see one thing, and that's freedom. And this world desperately needs free women. See, there are positive big picture effects and side effects from this movement. And me personally, I see goddess energy returning to the planet in this. I see a planet that has been ravaged by hyper-masculine energy that lives in all peoples these days. An energy that manifests in our phallically shaped weapons and bombs, right? It manifests in our thirst for conflict over collaboration. And it shows up in ways like defining humans as mankind when women are clearly over half the people on the planet, right? Ladies, it seems sometimes that the very ocean is crying out for your liberation. The atmosphere itself is reaching out for you. And it seems that what is done to women in the micro is done to the earth on the macro. And how we treat women is literally how we treat the planet. Therefore, any privilege that comes at your expense is a privilege that I don't want, because no true man is threatened by a woman in her full glory. And if the brother is, he's operating from his programming and not his higher self. All privilege eventually falls apart because you can never have heaven making hell for someone else, y'all. I tell men all the time, bruh, you want women to be free, dude. You want women with ownership of their bodies. And I say to them, you want the world that these lady warriors are building. Whether it's Michelle Alexander with prison industrial complex reform or Red Fawn at Standing Rock. Whether it's Janet Mock working hard for trans rights or Maria Hinojosa fighting to protect DACA and the Dreamers. The woman running for office and working and parenting at the same time. The woman working 12-hour days while still taking care of her family. Ladies, you are the proverbial rose that grew from concrete. You are the blossom that bloomed to break the shackle. Because in women embracing ambition and saving themselves, women like you out here, and y'all watching, will indeed save the world. Thank you very much. I'm Theo.